Good evening and welcome to the mountains of central Vietnam. Tonight the story of a unique reunion, how a tightly knit group of Vietnam veterans returns to the same honored ground they walked on, lost friends on exactly 30 years ago. This is their story, and it is a story of promises, forgiveness, renewal, and healing. The fishing villages, the nets, this way of life in Vietnam, indeed a reflection of age-old traditions here in Southeast Asia, where for generations fish nets and stilled houses formed the landscape near the sea. This is the Vietnam that welcomed back the veterans, the same Vietnam they left behind 30 years ago. It was B Troop, one of the country's most decorated units in Vietnam, that would search out the enemy, provide cover for grunts in the field. Places like Hamburger Hill and the bloodshed on Hill 376 all would become part of this return. A homecoming of healing, a return of remembrance.
It just takes a few minutes to, get my bearings, and yes.
Kirk Jensen of Fargo is a veteran of B Troop. As he visited old familiar ground, he tells us he needed to return without really knowing the reason why.
To think that when I left Vietnam in 1969, I had said to myself, well, I'll never return. But here I am. Well, I've thought about Vietnam for 30 years, but I will say that in the last 3 months, I've probably talked more about it than I have in 30 years.
The memories from 30 years ago rekindled.
But we had 3 guys killed in 3 minutes after we put them in.
It was.
I didn't even make a turn when the radio call came in. We got 3 KIS.
Stories of June 1969. How J.R. Baltazar hears for the first time tonight that the man sitting next to him, Ken Barwick, a Cobra pilot, spoke to him over the radio that night on Hill 376 as J.R. lay pinned down, he and others ambushed by the North Vietnamese, his buddies massacred.
I found out it was Ken I was talking to. I didn't know that.
5.6 X-ray, Banshee 2.7.
Right.
I had asked JR when we got here the other night. He and I were sitting around talking, and I asked him. I said, "Did we really help?" Because we knew they were dug in, and for all this time, the biggest question I wanted to ask you was, did we help? Because everybody, as you remember, we just felt so useless.
The stories would go on into the night during this reunion in Vietnam as the unit prepared to climb the hill where so many buddies died and where a nightmare still remained. Fernando de Perez, today's reunion organizer. He was the chopper pilot who flew in the platoon from B Troop on that deadly day exactly 30 years ago. He too will climb the hill.
All these years that I never brought these guys out of the hill where I put them. I realized that I couldn't, but you still feel the guilt, And I always had a desire to go back, to go back.
And so this is why they came, to see the land today, her people, to heal old wounds, and to cleanse hearts still hurting.
Can't forget it, Yeah. Cannot forget it.
A few things you start, you give me a little time to think today. Things are starting to come back that is not very pleasant.
I think for me, it's going to be good to bring closure to it, to actually be back there and to be with the guys who were there on that day.
It is this group then, some who were just 17 at the time, who came to Vietnam in the late 60s to witness humanity at its very best, at its worst. And because so many questions were left unanswered, they return now to climb the hill tomorrow.
This is a good one. Who would have thought 30 years ago guys would be doing this? Nobody.
As evening falls in Vietnam tonight, the sky is on fire. Some will not sleep at all this evening because the mountain lay ahead. With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Walden, WDAY News. The morning air is thick as the sun rises on Vietnam's China Beach. The monsoons are here, a promise of another hot, sultry day in the mountains of Vietnam. This is a country that has changed so much in 30 years, yet Vietnam, with all its beauty, hangs on to its centuries-old traditions.
We were all up around these hills here.
Today, the bus is quiet as the veterans approach the base of Hill 376. "30 years ago today, members of B Troop were dropped in on Hill 376 and ambushed June 2nd, 1969.
You got that feeling. Something's bad going to happen that day.
J.R. Baltazar was only 17, one of 14 kids of a Colorado farm family. He volunteered to go to Vietnam and is one of a few survivors, heroes of Hill 376. Today, he helps lead 18 back to the hill for an emotional return. This is the first group allowed on the hill since the war. Communist leaders had to give the unit special permission. It is a hot, wet day.
I tell you, it's just like it was. I mean, I can remember this spot. I remember this ridge line.
Ken Barwick made the climb. He served 2.5 tours in Vietnam, a gunship pilot from a family of veterans. He provided gun cover from a Cobra that day when troops were dropped in on Hill 376 in search of the 2nd North Vietnamese Army Regiment.
On that day, I remember that was just we thought a routine mission.
The mission was anything but routine.
Our aircraft hadn't been out of the LZ 5 minutes when we heard taking fire. And then it just chaos for the next few minutes.
I like that with the shell on it.
We knew that we had lost people. We didn't know exactly how many were dead or how many were wounded, but we knew there were a lot of casualties. And since the only radio contact we had was with JR, we feared the worst.
With these memories, they all climbed. In 95-degree heat, choking humidity, a 3-hour hike up Hill 376. But there was a reason these people moved forward like determined plow horses.
We put them on the hill and we never took them out. And we had to come and get them out.
Baltazar remembers how the fighting broke out. A buddy chasing a chicken.
This chicken took them right into a bunker complex. And pretty soon we heard some firing. And then Sergeant Saunders was yelling for the medic.
Joseph LaPointe received the Congressional Medal of Honor, a Silver Star. He didn't want to fight in Vietnam. He was the proud father of a new baby boy. This poet, musician, and nature lover was drafted and became the Doc of B Troop. This medic died while trying to save others again on this hill.
He was a conscientious objector, so he never carried a gun. They made him a medic, and of course they told him that he would probably be the first one shot.
Doc's wife Cindy and son Joe, who was only 5 months old when his father died, knew they had to return to Vietnam and make this climb.
I think it helps. You know, you carry this for so long. And all the release of the tears and the emotions, you know, you haven't been able to do that for all this time, and you've held it in.
Doc, the reliable medic, was there that day when the NVA ambushed B Troop. He was about to leave for R&R in Hawaii with his wife Cindy the next day.
We suggested he stay back.
Only 18 troops were dropped in, but one by one the NVA killed them, including Doc LaPointe.
And he went up and he started administering first aid. And pretty soon, Doc was hit.
It's very comforting to know that I had such an incredible father.
Soon Balthazar found himself pinned down, out of ammunition, surrounded by his dead buddies, and North Vietnamese Army troops everywhere.
And then I heard the yelling from the NVA to surrender.
At times, the NVA threw small rocks at the men to see if they would move into the line of fire. At this point, 5 dead, several wounded.
Exactly what I thought. I thought, you know, we're dead.
Have we lost anybody?
At times during this long hike up the hill, the heat forced some to drop out. It is here, close to the top, where veteran Fernando, who flew in the platoon to the hill that day, gave thanks and honored those who died. Fernando says he came on this trip to bring back the boys he brought to the hill 30 years ago. To bring back their souls, he said.
May they rest in peace.
This is a time to grieve, but only for a few moments. After a brief rest, they all breathed and moved on to the top.
Ready, JR?
What lay ahead? The next 2 hours would change the lives of everyone here. 30 years ago, these men left a nightmare on Hill 376. Now they return to the hill, a hill of forgiveness, of liberation. With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Wallen, WDAY News.
We never hardly ever stayed on the trail. That's suicide.
The jungle path on the mountain became steeper and thick with vegetation as B Troop got to the top of Hill 376. After the 3-hour climb, the men who thought they would never leave this mountain alive 30 years ago to the day stood on the boulders they used for cover then.
We started receiving heavy fire from all those trees.
And for the first time, told the story of the bloody ambush.
I was looking up the hill, which is right here, this area right here. I can see the NVA coming down. Look like hundreds coming down.
On top of that hill, in stifling heat and humidity, J.R. Balthazar, then 17, an infantry grunt, told how he and a half dozen other men tried to fight off the waves of NVA, and how one by one, the men of B Troop fell.
We're going. I said, we're pinned down. It's bad. Can't go out of the radio. I thought that was it.
A wife finally heard the story of her heroic husband, Doc LaPointe, a medic, how he crawled on his belly to save his buddies, shot down, then tried again to help, then shot again. His son Joe heard the story too. He was only 5 months old at the time. He never saw his father, but today he stood on the hill with him.
And dog got to Saunders. Probably the military first aid. You got hit.
No.
He moved on to Reed. Probably the same. He got hit it again. That was final for the 3.
When it was over, of the dozen men dropped in on Hill 376, 5 were dead, several injured. Best friends who lay dead beside Baltazar, now pinned down for the night.
They took out our wounded, left the dead with us. We stayed the night with our dead.
Reinforcements finally came in the morning to rescue the fallen, the hurting on 376, a night that changed them forever. The vets then walked around the top of the hill, exhausted from the climb, emotionally drained from hearing the story for the first time. Ken Barwick, a Cobra gunship pilot that day, read from the Bible.
He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty.
High enough so clouds gathered below us, B-Troop found comfort in the words.
You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or the arrow that flies by day, or the pestilence that stalks in the darkness.
And then one of the most moving moments of the veterans' visit to Vietnam, on top of that hill, the group pulled out the slips of paper, rubbings made at the wall in Washington, D.C. by helicopter pilot Fernando de Paris. Names of those who died 30 years ago to the day on Hill 376. Today, those pieces of paper became a son's goodbye to his father.
Jimmy L. Reed. Joseph Guy LaPointe Jr. God bless them all. Amen.
The rubbings burned. The wind blew the ashes across the hill.
Our hearts.
And watching all of this, a few locals, Vietnamese farmers, they had been waiting, and it wasn't until this moment they told B-Troop they too were on the hill that day, 30 years ago. They too remember B-Troop because they were Viet Cong fighting against them. Today, men who tried to take each other's lives 3 decades ago posed for pictures, arms around each other. This indeed was healing on the hill, a day of forgiveness, renewal, remembering those who sacrificed so much here. For many, a release.
He was there. He was waiting. And I think we all felt those people waiting for us.
There was a presence there. There was definitely a presence there. It was such an incredible moment. And you could feel love. You could feel the pain.
They had climbed the hill, knowing the fears and terrible memories of that day. They left the hill, knowing now they could finally move on.
I think the healing process is really getting underway. There's always going to be a part of us up there. But we're also taking those guys home with us.
With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Walden, WDAY News. Operation Apache Snow, one of the largest air operations of the Vietnam War. And on Hamburger Hill, the U.S. would suffer heavy losses and a public relations nightmare. After winning the hill, U.S. forces withdrew, leaving Hamburger Hill to the enemy again.
Children, watch that sound. Everybody look what's going down.
No piece of ground as such is important to us. Our mission is to find the NVA units and to destroy them.
Hamburger Hill is on the mind of Steve Jones every day. It is here where this Nisswa, Minnesota man nearly lost his life after being shot down on Hamburger Hill, May 13, 1969. They had found an enemy trail and had spotted North Vietnamese army there. But
this time they were waiting for us.
Within seconds, Jones had become a number, a statistic in the Vietnam War.
What happened is it shot our tail boom off, and we immediately began to spin from the torque. So we were just like a pinball going from bumper to bumper through those trees.
All on board the chopper lay on the jungle floor.
He tried to get me out, and I was just pinned in there unconscious.
Jones had critical injuries, shrapnel, broken bones.
I was in a coma for 3 days. When I woke up, I didn't know who I was, where I was.
Like others on this B-Troop reunion trip to Vietnam, Jones has experienced tough emotional times over the years, nightmares, survivor's guilt. He writes and publishes a lot of his thoughts. He writes, "I am going back to Vietnam to die. Give another life to live. I am going back to exchange it for yet another one. And I'm looking forward to the freedom of letting go."
I've never gone a day of my life since that I haven't thought about it in some way.
Oh, it's changed so much.
Kirk Jensen of Fargo walked the ground he knew 30 years ago, Camp Eagle.
Well, yeah, and when we had our helicopter sitting, we had a large flat area.
Kirk was 20 years old when he enlisted. It was 1969. He would become part of B Troop here in Vietnam,
All the leaves are brown.
working with the pilots who left on a mission every day.
Every morning, I can remember the choppers winding up and the guys getting on board and taking off, and well, you just hope that they all came back.
Kirk Jensen would also travel to the places that meant so much to him in Vietnam and bring a piece of it home again.
My present shall go with thee, and I carried this Bible with me the whole year. So today, I will put some dirt in it, and when we get the Camp Eagle, I'll put some more dirt in it. It was a part of home with me all the time.
These camps, these bases look so different now.
But if we could just recognize one thing, I think we could piece it all together.
But there was a sense of belonging.
The feeling is here.
A piece of yesterday, found today.
Well, we might not be at the exact spot, but we're back. We're back.
Oh well.
Like many, Kirk sent letters home to his family in central Minnesota during the Vietnam War. They were letters from a 20-year-old on a tape recorder, far from his Midwestern home.
It's okay over here. Of course, I hate it, you know that, but about as good as could be expected. In fact, I can't wait to see all of you. Just can't wait to get back, that's all.
And I think I will open up to 23rd Psalm. And I think that would be a good spot to put a little bit of dirt from Camp Eagle. And there it'll stay.
With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Waldman, WDAY News. 30 years have passed since the veterans walked the ground of Vietnam. In some ways, so little has changed. The beautiful countryside and the faces of Vietnam greeted the Americans back for another tour.
He's the chairman of the Veteran Committee.
Oh, what a pleasure to meet you. What a pleasure to meet you.
After an emotional day of climbing Hill 376 and honoring those who lost their lives, it was time to meet the men who 3 decades ago were known as Charlie, the enemy.
That's...
We were there too, 30 years ago today.
In a remarkable meeting, some of the North Vietnamese top military officials from the war today told stories, answered questions, and perhaps most importantly, became friends.
I wonder today why they didn't blow me out of the sky when it was so easy.
The NVA commander smiles and says, "We did not shoot you down that day on the hill because we would not be able to shake your hand today." For more than an hour, B Troop listened to these hardened veterans. The Americans traded stories with the Vietnamese. Everyone mesmerized, not believing what was happening here. In an emotional gesture, the NVA veterans made a point of meeting the wife and son of Medic Doc LaPointe, who died on Hill 376.
Và tặng cho ai? Tặng cho ví dụ như chúng tôi cựu chiến binh tặng.
And then these men, who fought against each other, became like brothers. The Vietnamese gave a coveted military medal to the American veterans,
We tell them we're very honored,
including the family of Doc LaPointe. No one could have predicted this. A common bond formed in just an hour. Smiles and hugs instead of guns and grenades. 52-year-old Bob Bowler, a much decorated Vietnam veteran who was shot down 3 times and has suffered post-war problems, today embraces those once feared and hated.
Thank you.
A moment no one here will forget. The healing continues. With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Wallivan, WDAY News.
And to think that I used to fix the radios in these things. Unbelievable.
There are still vivid and chilling signs of the war in Vietnam. Barbed wire and a chain gate are all that remain of the U.S. Embassy in Ho Chi Minh City. A war museum there paints the GI and the U.S. as criminals during the war.
I was hoping that they had the same feeling that let's mend the feelings in this war, which is what I wanted to do, was mend the feelings, and then to get over and see that they're showing us in a manner like that when they committed the same atrocities. I'm a little confused.
But through the week, many friendly, welcoming faces of Vietnam, helping the veterans walk through these days of healing, climbing the hill to remember best friends, husbands, and fathers lost.
The camaraderie there from when you share life together and you fight for life, it's tough to forget that.
Now, I thought for years I was okay. You know, I hear all these stories about guys having problems and everything, and I said, well, you're okay, you know. But apparently I wasn't. You know, now I'm learning now that you know, it was in my head and I just didn't want to get it out.
Visits to old base camps.
It was towards the water where we brought them in.
Where boys from the farms came to become members of B Troop.
There's a lot of history here. It's been very emotional.
Some of the men here have struggled. Sleepless nights and bad dreams haunt them still after 30 years. Steve Jones shot down on Hamburger Hill. J.R. Baltazar pinned down on Hill 376, the bodies of best friends beside him, and all the rest who came on this trip. Now they know why they came.
I haven't seen some of these guys in 30 years. And there's nothing I wouldn't do for them now.
Many kept journals of the trip.
Can't believe I'm actually here. Speechless. Emotions, emotions, emotions. Hugging Donna. Crying publicly. JR telling me that he wouldn't be here without me.
Spouses who came along on the return to Vietnam leave emotionally drained yet comforted.
It was each end of the spectrum of emotion going up that hill, between the beauty on one end that you go, I've never seen anything this beautiful, to seeing these men relive such an important part of their life and something that changed them forever, but yet also seeing them come together.
And for many, it was the climb up that hill that answered the question, why return?
Yeah, it was real. And you almost had to be up there to feel that emotion, to really understand why we made that climb.
The camaraderie lasts forever.
As they prepared to leave Vietnam, the veterans who 30 years ago came to this land were honored by children of Vietnam. In a special service, the dead were remembered, the living thanked. The veterans celebrated. A familiar hymn brought tears, but it also brought peace. When they came back for this tour, these veterans returned with a purpose: to bring back the souls left on Hill 376 30 years ago, to confront the fears, cherish the camaraderie, and to leave here spiritually renewed and healed. On this last evening, a beautiful, quiet Vietnam said farewell. The veterans had finally found peace. With photographer Eric Spear in Vietnam, Kevin Wald on WDAY News.